Tehran is no longer hiding its collapse. The streets of Iran's capital have become a living symbol of fear, desperation, and anger. On one side of the city, families stand in endless bread lines, struggling to survive as prices rise beyond imagination. On the other side, millions of residents wake up to dry water taps and electricity cuts that plunge entire neighborhoods into darkness. For years, the Iranian regime maintained control through fear. Protesters were silenced, dissidents disappeared. Security forces dominated every major square and avenue. But now something has changed. The fear that once protected the government is beginning to disappear. Mass demonstrations are spreading across Tehran and beyond. Protesters chant against corruption, inflation, and dictatorship. Videos circulating online show crowds refusing to move even as riot police attempt to clear the streets. In some areas, officers appear hesitant, retreating instead of advancing. This crisis did not begin with politics alone. It began with survival. Iran's currency has suffered one of the worst collapses in modern history. The rial has lost enormous value, turning ordinary life into an impossible struggle. A worker can labor for an entire month and still fail to afford basic necessities. Food prices continue climbing. Medicine has become scarce. Rent is crushing families already drowning in inflation. The Grand Bazaar of Tehran, one of the oldest and most powerful commercial centers in the country, has become the center of economic rebellion. Merchants who once helped sustain the system are now shutting their stores in protest. The sound of metal shutters slamming shut echoes through the city like a warning signal. This matters because the bazaar has always played a critical role in Iranian political history. In 1979, shopkeepers and merchants became one of the forces that helped bring down the Shah today. Many observers believe history may be repeating itself, but this time against the current regime. As protests intensified, the government reacted with emergency measures. Authorities shut down schools, government offices, and financial institutions in several provinces. The stock exchange halted operations. Entire sectors of public life suddenly froze. But these actions revealed something deeper. The regime no longer appeared confident in its ability to govern normally. Meanwhile, social media videos painted an even darker picture. Residents rushed to collect water using plastic containers and buckets. Some neighborhoods experienced severe shortages, sparking panic among families afraid that basic services were collapsing entirely. The economic numbers only added fuel to the fire. Inflation rates reportedly surged beyond 40%. Food costs climbed dramatically within a single year. Essential imports became increasingly difficult to secure due to sanctions, currency instability, and shortages of foreign reserves. For ordinary Iranians, the crisis stopped being political theory. It became personal reality. A father unable to buy bread, a mother unable to find medicine, students uncertain about their future, workers watching their salaries become worthless overnight. University students soon joined the demonstrations, bringing even more energy to the streets. Their slogans reflected exhaustion rather than ideology. Many protesters no longer argued about political factions or reform. Instead, they focused on survival, dignity, and the simple desire for stability. The government itself also began showing signs of internal fracture. Members of parliament publicly criticized senior officials. Economic leaders faced pressure and accusations over missing funds and failed policies. Rumors spread of disagreements within the political elite as public anger intensified. Observers noticed another unusual development: the absence of strong public appearances from senior leadership during the peak of the crisis. This silence fueled speculation and uncertainty inside the country. As the protests spread from Tehran to cities including Isfahan, Shiraz, Mashhad, and Kermanshah, the sense of instability deepened. Demonstrations were no longer isolated incidents. They were becoming national. The situation grew especially dangerous because Iran's economic crisis was colliding with environmental disaster. Water shortages, drought conditions, and infrastructure problems created enormous pressure on already struggling communities. In some regions, people feared that access to clean water itself could become unreliable. This combination of economic collapse and resource scarcity created a powerful sense of panic. People were no longer simply demanding reforms, they were demanding survival. And when survival becomes uncertain, governments often face their greatest tests. Security forces found themselves in an increasingly difficult position. Many officers faced the same inflation, shortages, and economic pain as the protesters themselves. The divide between state and society became less clear. The question quietly spreading across Tehran was no longer whether protests would continue. The real question was whether the system itself could still function under such pressure. Every closed shop, every empty shelf, every blackout, every protest chant, all of it pointed toward a nation entering one of the most unstable moments in its modern history. And beyond Iran's borders, the world was watching carefully. Because what happens in Tehran never stays, only in Tehran. As protests expanded across Iran, another battle was unfolding behind closed doors, a battle within the regime itself. The leadership in Tehran suddenly appeared divided, nervous, and increasingly desperate. Public officials who once projected unity began openly criticizing one another. Parliament members attacked government ministers on live television. Economic failures were no longer hidden behind propaganda slogans. The crisis had become too large to conceal. Reports emerged that billions of dollars in expected oil revenue were missing or unaccounted for. Questions spread rapidly through political circles. Where had the money gone, and who was responsible? At the center of the storm stood President Masoud Pezeshkian, facing enormous pressure from lawmakers furious over inflation and economic collapse. Political rivals warned that if prices continued rising, the government itself could face removal or collapse. This was no longer ordinary political disagreement. It looked like a power struggle fueled by fear. Iran's economy had become dangerously dependent on unstable revenue streams while sanctions continued to squeeze trade and investment. At the same time, years of corruption allegations weakened public trust even further. The regime faced a brutal reality. There was not enough money to calm the population. Oil revenues, once the backbone of state power, no longer guaranteed stability. Foreign currency shortages intensified, businesses struggled to import goods, factories slowed production or shut down entirely due to energy shortages and lack of materials. Industrial paralysis soon became another major threat. Factories unable to operate meant unemployment would rise even further. Workers who lost jobs joined demonstrations already growing in size and intensity. Meanwhile, infrastructure problems continued worsening. Electricity shortages disrupted production lines and public services. Water scarcity created additional unrest in urban areas. Entire communities felt abandoned by authorities, unable to provide basic necessities. The social contract between the government and the people was rapidly deteriorating. For decades, the regime relied on a combination of ideology, security, power, and state support systems to maintain authority. But now millions of citizens questioned whether the government could still provide even minimal stability. And when trust disappears, fear alone often becomes insufficient. Inside Tehran, security forces faced increasing pressure as demonstrations spread into economically important districts. Protesters blocked roads and organized strikes that disrupted daily life. The closure of major commercial centers threatened supply chains connecting the capital to other regions. Merchants and workers who once avoided politics were becoming active participants in the unrest. This development alarmed authorities because economic protests can evolve into political revolutions very quickly. The atmosphere became even more dangerous as videos surfaced showing confrontations between demonstrators and police. Some footage appeared to show officers retreating under pressure from crowds. Whether isolated or widespread, such images carried enormous symbolic power. They suggested the possibility that state authority itself was weakening. The government attempted to regain control through emergency measures, crackdowns, and calls for dialogue. But mixed messaging created confusion. One faction demanded harsher repression. Another warned that excessive force could inflame the crisis further. At the same time, public anger toward corruption reached new levels. Citizens accused elites of protecting themselves while ordinary people suffered. Lavish lifestyles associated with powerful figures contrasted sharply with empty shelves and rising hunger among the population. The economic crisis became more than financial, it became moral. And once a government loses moral legitimacy in the eyes of its citizens, restoring confidence becomes extremely difficult. And the protests also carried deep historical symbolism. Many demonstrators compared the current moment to the revolutionary unrest that overthrew the Tresh in 1979. The same bazaars that once mobilized against the monarchy now echoed with anti-government slogans again. History seemed to be haunting the Islamic Republic, but this crisis was unfolding in a far more connected and dangerous world. Social media accelerated the spread of videos, rumors, and protest footage. Every confrontation could instantly become national news. The leadership understood the danger. That is why internet restrictions, information controls, and emergency security measures intensified during the unrest. Authorities feared not only demonstrations themselves, but the psychological momentum they created, because revolutions often grow when people realize they are not alone. Still, the government's problems extended beyond domestic unrest. Iran's instability carried enormous regional and international consequences. Its military networks, strategic alliances, and industrial production all depended on internal stability. If the crisis deepened further, the effects would spread far beyond Iran's borders, and one country in particular had reason to worry more than most: Russia.